Appreciate your time and attention. Today's meeting is really to have a conversation between the consultant that staff has been working with well, we haven't worked with them, we don't have a contract with them yet at this point, but really to bring them to the forefront, have them meet the council meet them. We've got some folks that are virtually, and they're there because of just recommendations because of what's going on with the pandemic. For those circumstances. We've got some representatives that are here present on site, and so it'll be sort of a back and forth between a virtual discussion along with an in-person discussion. As I mentioned, this is an opportunity for the council and the community to see who staff is proposing for the project team, who they are, their approach. There's absolutely no action to be taken tonight or today. Really, the intent is really to do most of the introductions. And then at the end, certainly welcome questions from the council and to be able to ask of the consultant. At the end of that, once we're concluding with that piece, then we'll also make some comments regarding the next steps as far as the timeline, along with the committees, and how you all as council would like to approach the committee process. With that, is it okay if I go over Mr. Anderson? Mr. Anderson, we were just doing a quick introduction to council members, if you don't mind saying who you are.
Yes, Jay Anderson, council representative for the Southwest Board.
And so with that, I'm going to turn over to Elena Chapin, and she is going to do a quick introduction of the project team and then let them go with their presentation.
All right, Elena Chapin, city planner. So like Marta said, we have a few members of the team who are attending in person and some who are remote. And so I'll introduce them, and as I introduce the people who are in the room, I'd like to just raise your hand. And Francois, as I introduce you, feel free to turn your camera on so we can see and hear you, okay?
Certainly, I will.
All right, so over here on the left, we have Jay Narana. She is she's the principal for Livable Plans, and so she'll be our expert for codes and regulations and small area plans. And then to her right is Brisa Byford. She's with Civic Brand. They're the community outreach and engagement sub-consultant. Behind them, you see Danny Hayes. He's a PE. He works with KSA. He's the infrastructure and floodplain manager expert. And I believe Mr. Bob Thunder is right next to him as well, if you don't mind raising your hand. And so Francois, he's the project manager with Ddj. Francois, do you want to turn your screen on and so we can...
Hi. Hello, everybody.
We also have Ryan Short with Civic Brand. He's going to be the project manager on this public engagement side. Ryan, let me see your face. Right, and then we have Jason Klotch. He's with Catalyst, and he's our economic market analysis expert. And so, Jason, if you'll put them to your face, all right. Now, we do have a lot of information to cover tonight. There's a lot of slides. And so with that, Francois, I'll let you start.
Before we go, just so you know, this presentation will be posted on the website first thing in the morning. It's a large presentation, so what we've got provided is some printouts for council, but we will have that presentation on the website tomorrow.
All right. Francois, you ready?
Well, thank you, Elena. I just want to make sure that my screen is visible to you.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to present to the council. We really see this as a wonderful opportunity to share with you our vision for what we can do for you in your community. The fact that you have decided to do your comprehensive plan, go down the master plan, as well as looking at the future I-69 corridor plan, that is very significant. Because with planning, you can have direction for the future. And the way that we are looking at this as a team, and what is important to us, is that we are listeners. We listen with intent to your community. In fact, we will make sure that we hear from as many as possible people within the community. And with that, with listening, we will also be responsible with that information, because we're going to use that to help determine, well, what should the future of this community look like. And then we will also be very responsive in terms of our delivery.
So that will really be specific to your community and what your needs are. What we want to talk about today this is the table of contents with the short introduction, approach, tasks. We want to talk about timeline. Public engagement, we really want to spend some time on that because that is indeed very, very important. And then also economic analysis. We also want to look at project fee, and then there will be a discussion. At this point, I want to make sure, is my sound clear? Can everybody hear me well?
There is some, we're getting some feedback, Francois. There's somebody with their speaker on, and we're getting background noise.
I also get some background noise, yes, and I'm not sure where it comes from.
Elena, you may want to mute your audio while Francois presents, and if you want to get his attention, just kind of wave in front of him or something, because I'm getting background actually from the main room.
Perfect. Is this better for everybody? Not hearing from you, I assume that is better. So with that then, let's talk a little bit about the team itself. And Elena did a quick introduction of the team, but I want to specifically point out that while DDJ will be responsible as the prime for visioning, for planning, urban design, trails, QAQC, etc., our sub-consultants are really chosen specifically for what they bring to the table. Each one of them are truly specialized in their field. And not only that, the people that you see on the screen, they are the people that will be involved with this project. You will see them at meetings. And so we always pride ourselves to the fact that when we present like this to our communities, we tell them that we will be the ones that will be doing this project for you. So we obviously have the public outreach and engagement. We have the infrastructure of flood management by KSA, Catalyst with for market economics and housing with Jason. And then Jay, who's really perhaps one of the best zoning and regulation writers in the state of Texas, she's on our team as well. And then Jody Short from Lee Engineering for transportation planning. And then lastly, Michael from 215 Consulting, also on our team. And we're very excited about the fact that we do have the local firms like 215 and KSA on our team, because that help us as outside consultants to have that connection to your community and understand what's happening on the ground. So our approach that we follow in our planning, first of all, we do a lot of community engagement. And you will see it, we will describe it, we will share it with you. And that is important because, again, this is the plan that is the community's plan. And we want to make sure that we are reflective of what their needs are, their desires, and what the vision is that they have for their community. We're also very specific in how we integrate the different disciplines. In other words, we don't have land use as one component, transportation, infrastructure, and then economics all on its own. No, what we do, we make sure that when we do our land use planning, it's integrated with transportation. Likewise, it's integrated with infrastructure and the economics as well, an overarching aspect of how do you get this plan to be fiscally responsible, to be economically successful. Everything needs to be integrated. So that's a key component of our approach. The other aspect of our approach is that we always look at the different scales of the area that we work in. In your particular case, because we are doing a comprehensive plan, that's looking at the citywide area. In fact, it will include the ETJ and even beyond, perhaps. The point is that it's really a large area that we look at. But then we also focus on in smaller areas. And some of these smaller areas, of course, is downtown. Because that is such an important destination within your community, if not for the whole of Texas. And obviously then the I-69 corridor plan, which also is regarded as a small area plan, is part of the different scales in terms of the large and the small. The typical and relevant planning principles that we will be applying to your community is, number one, it's neighborhood transitions. We want to make sure that there's truly integration and a good transition from your downtown to your surrounding neighborhoods. We want to make sure that the university has a transition towards the neighboring communities as well as a transition towards downtown. But then also connectivity, because without connectivity, it doesn't help you have a transition. The connectivity is what brings different neighborhoods together. It also then with that goes walkability. In other words, to be able to walk from one area to another with a choice of either transportation in terms of vehicles or perhaps even with bicycle. The point is that those three aspects of neighborhood transitioning, connectivity, and walkability makes your city and will make your city a true place for people to want to be and to find quality of life opportunities. We also, as part of our approach, specifically build on Nacogdoches' strengths and beauty. You have so much. You have the beautiful landscape, the natural landscape. You've got the creek that runs, and a few of your creeks that run through your town, and you have the beautiful gardens and other aspects of your town that we want to celebrate. But perhaps more important, the overarching principle is we want to achieve quality of life for you, not just for some, but for everybody, for all people. We want to achieve quality of life. So that is an overarching principle of everything that we do. The project tasks that we are looking at, we have 7 of those. And again, remember, this will cover the comprehensive plan, the downtown master plan, as well as the future I-69 corridor plan. So first of all, the first task is project management and pre-planning. And obviously the pre-planning is looking at demographics, is looking at existing conditions and all of that. But then we have public participation, which is then the second task. Now, what is you will see if I go through the timeline that public participation really is touch upon every one of these tasks. We have the comprehensive plan elements as task 3, task 4, the downtown master plan, task 5, the future I-69 corridor study, and then we will make sure we have an overall implementation plan that will really take the results of each of those studies, that the downtown plan, the comprehensive plan, the corridor study, even housing, all of that to be overarching together in an implementation plan that shows the links between those different elements and how they will be a path of how to implement that. And then finally, the last task is report writing, presentations, and adoption of the plan. So at this point, I would like to talk a little bit about the timeline. How do these different tasks play out over the course of the study? Well, what you will see on the screen is you have the last quarter of 2021, assuming that we can start in October. And then we have 2022, and we have 11 months indicated there. So it's a first, second, third quarter, and then part of a fourth quarter. The project management and pre-planning is something that just, actually not the pre-planning per se, but the project management at least is something that runs throughout the course of the study. The public participation, as you will see, runs for the majority of the project. The reason is that we're not only going to listen to your community once and then eventually come back at the end. No, throughout the process, throughout the planning process, we will have multiple touch points where we will engage you, the community, with meetings, with surveys, through the website, through digital outreach, etc. So it's a continuous effort in terms of public participation. The comprehensive plan elements that will start around about perhaps the second month in 2022 till about August. Downtown master plan will follow up on that, and the reason is it starts not simultaneously with the comprehensive plan because the comprehensive plan sets the direction, it sets the tone, it sets the vision, which the downtown plan will link to. And so also for the corridor study, that really is a subset of the comprehensive plan. But all of those studies comes to an end around about August, not an end, but really is when the final recommendations are written down and then presented to you. And then we look at the implementation, and we look at the report writing and adoption, which then will take place between July and November. A little bit more detail. So for project management and pre-planning, as you can see, we have the different subtasks, and most of what happens there in terms of pre-planning happens till about January. The public participation, as I mentioned, stresses for majority of the project. So meetings will start in November right down to September of next year. The man on the street, there will be these intermittent man on the street engagement efforts. There will be some surveys, again, throughout the course of the project. There will be some digital outreach and engagement, also then throughout the process. We will have a 2-day comprehensive plan visioning session. And what you will notice is that that particular period happens in January. That's when the comprehensive plan really, the elements are starting to be addressed. So the visioning exercise leads into the comprehensive plan. The 2-day design charrette, again, leads into the downtown plan, and you will see that in a minute. And then we, of course, have opportunities for volunteers to be engaged or to engage the community, and we have some updates and progress reports. Again, the comprehensive plan elements from February to August. I won't go too much in detail with that. Downtown master plan starts in March till about August, and then the future corridor study with all the different elements there as well. Overall implementation, again, July till about October. And that exists of action steps, implementation strategy. It has a comprehensive decision-making package so that you know how to make your decisions, and if you make your decisions, to have a good record of those decisions that you make. And then obviously the adoption. But at this stage, I'm going to ask Ryan to, actually Brisa, who is with you, Ryan and or Brisa, to share with you their thoughts about engagement. Ryan.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna, since Brisa's there in the room with you, Brisa, do you want to kind of take it through this? And the room is muted if she's talking.
You can speak. You apologize. All right.
You want to understand
Sure. Okay, so the first few slides here talk about what does engagement mean? And then the next few slides talk about what are the specific methods that it would use in order to engage people. So you can go ahead, Francois.
Okay, just in case, because.
Oh, there's one. I didn't even see that. Perfect. Okay, that would be really sorry. No, that's fine. Okay, much better?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, okay. So our approach to engagement really starts off with this kind of core idea that there is equality and there is equity. And a lot of times people get those confused, but they're two different things. And so equality, you can see in the little illustration there, would just be treating everyone equally. So that would be, let's do one online survey, let's have a public meeting, and that's our engagement. Equity means going to people and reaching them where they're at. And so that requires different methods per audience to make sure that we're going to where they're going to be, where they're most likely to provide input. So kind of quick high level. So the way that we are, this process is designed to reach everyone. One, it's persona based. So that means we look at all of the different audiences in the community, whether they've just moved here, they've been here for years, they're old, they're young, whatever the demographics might be, and look at, what are those key organizations within them, who are individuals that can help us reach them, so that it's tailored to that specific group. There's digital solutions so that we can really effectively and efficiently reach a wide audience of people who might never want to attend a public meeting. It's mobile friendly, so if you don't have internet at home or you're on the go, whatever it might be, you can provide input just from your phone. And then on the street engagement, that's that key component of meeting people where they're at, not expecting them to come to us, but going to them to seek their input. So I know it's hard to see, but we'll kind of dive into this a little bit more. Essentially what you're looking at right now is a big picture overview of all the different tasks related to engagement. And the next few slides kind of build on each of these. So this is one section of that first image. So there's different things related to communication. So, for example, project branding. That helps us give a name to this project. It lets people know that, okay, when they see this brand, the city is seeking our input. There's different types of surveys. So not just one survey, but there's different topic surveys. We might get into the process and see, we really need to do one survey on this specific topic, instead of just, a large, just one size fits all survey. There's different digital outreach methods. So there's just a lot of different components that go into the engagement strategy. you continue on to the next one, Francois.
Actually, what I would like to share quickly is that if you look at this overall slide, is that if you look at the coloring that is used, the yellow shows that those type of efforts apply to all the different studies, whereas the magenta, the purple, refers specifically to downtown, the green specifically to the comprehensive plan, and then the blue to project branding. I think that gives you an overall sense and feel of the breadth of how this addresses everything in the community.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. By doing both of these, like the comprehensive plan and the downtown plan together, we're not fatiguing the community by asking them to, okay, give us input on the comprehensive plan, and then, 6 months down the road, someone else is asking them to talk about downtown. We can do a lot of these things at the same time. So like Francois was saying, a lot of the meetings, surveys, things like that, will actually be designed to get information on both, and then some will be designed specifically for the comp plan, some specifically for downtown. And so focus groups, for example, there's some that specifically will be comp plan related, some that are downtown related. Same with interviews. This is kind of our first stab at, who are some of those key groups that we might reach, but obviously as we get more into the process, that will get defined in more detail. And then there's man on the street engagement. So that's, like I said, going to people where they're at. So walking the campus of SFA, talking to students, sometimes we've done things like hang out outside of grocery stores and, hey, here's a $5 gift card for 5 minutes of your time. Just really where are the natural places in the community that people will be and going to them. Some public meetings, and there's potential for different activations or events, things like pop-ups, and kind of the way we see it is instead of holding a public meeting, throwing a public party, make it a little bit more exciting. Hopefully that'll attract more people. And then there's the 2-day visioning session related to the comp plan, but then a 2-day design charrette for the downtown plan. So some of those specific ways and methods that will engage with people. So like I mentioned earlier, project branding. So we believe really strongly in giving this process a name and an identity that people can identify. It just helps create that more awareness of the project, buy-in, civic pride, all of those things that the community can really rally behind. And so with that, there's a project website, but it's not just kind of a static one-page website. It's really viewed as an engagement platform, and it'd be offered in both English and Spanish. It'd be constantly updated, as the process goes along with, here's the latest survey findings, here's our, latest update on the meetings we've had, so that it's always kind of a living, breathing thing that people can return to. And as part of that website, you can go ahead to the next one, Francois. So as part of that website, we actually have a custom platform that allows us to, there's 12, more than 12, really interactive question types that we can ask people on that website. So you can drop a pin, we can ask people, is there, an intersection that needs to be addressed or things like that. People can drop a pin on that map. They can rank things by priority, preference tests, there's idea walls. So a lot of different question types so that we can engage people digitally. And as well, on the next slide, virtual engagement is going to be part of that engagement platform, that project website. So really, the goal of that is to, if we're having a public meeting, we want to offer people the same experience but online, because maybe they can't make that public meeting because they've got kids at home, or it doesn't sound fun to go to a public meeting. Well, they can provide that same input that they would at a meeting, but online. And it's a virtual room that you can kind of walk around and answer the different questions. And it would be, essentially the online version of what people would do in public. But then there's also things and opportunities that might come up where, hey, we just want to ask like a one-off question. We can use the website to do that if we're just real quick trying to get feedback. Also multiple surveys, like I mentioned, not just one survey, but different topic-specific surveys. Those will all be housed on that online engagement platform.
What I would like to share perhaps about the one-off questions is that what I enjoy by using them is that throughout the course of the project, you have these one-off questions to still keep people's attention, to engage them, and also to have them, again, look at the website and browse the website. So you drive people to the website by these one-off questions. And often these one-off questions can be received on your cell phone, and you can answer it that way. But it's a very effective way to keep on having people engage in the planning effort.
Yeah, and also using social media in the way to get the word out about this project and seek input. So that can be just Facebook mock groups that might exist, just different groups online, and then also promoting surveys, meetings, events that are going on to get the word out. And to Francois' point about, constantly re-engaging people, getting them to come back to the website for the latest update, for the latest question. We build a newsletter list, collect people's email, on in-person events and on the website too. And then we're able to send out e-blasts, hey, we've got this survey launching, we're having this event coming up, we have a new question on the site, there's a new update on the site to keep people updated and re-engaging. And then we'll also do various focus groups and one-on-one interviews. So that can be, different interest groups. We really want to make sure that we also engage students, not only at SFA, but just younger kids, children, because at the end of the day, this is very long-term planning. It's kind of for them, right? As they grow up, the changes or the things that in this plan will kind of become their community. So what do they want to see? What is their input? And then just different community organizations. As well as doing engagement on the street. So like I said, that's walking around campus and talking to students there, walking around town and just talking to people as they come in and out of restaurants and out of shops. But then we also like to attend a couple, already existing public events. So whether that's like a farmer's market or things like that, and do that man on the street style engagement at those as well. And so the visioning, the 2-day visioning session will be related to the comp plan, and then the design charrette will be related to downtown plan. So we'll facilitate those. But Francois, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add on from DTJ's end of things for those.
Yeah, I would really like to talk a little bit about, the multi-day visioning and design charrettes, the two-day events. And what we've done in the past, which is extremely successful, is that when you have this 2 days, that we come to you and we have a series of, for instance, the multi-day visioning for the comprehensive plan. We will have interviews, we will have focus group meetings, we will have a public meeting, all in that 2-day period. And then at the end of that 2-day period, we will have what you call a visioning session. And this visioning session is to have everyone that engaged in the focus group meeting, the interview, at that visioning session, because now they have some background information, and then we will have some engaging exercises with them, perhaps breaking up in groups of 5, and then establish a visioning statement, and then we share it with each other, or that type of engaging exercises. The design charrette for downtown is also happening over a 2-day period, and the beauty of that is that we will set up studio within your town. We will find a place and we will work. We will put our hands to paper and we will start drawing ideas, sketches. And people can come in anytime to see what our progress is. And we will have these intervals of sharing our findings and our ideas and our sketches with people and have some discussion, so that at the end of the 2 days, again, we can share with everyone, well, what is the result of our design that we came up for in terms of downtown. what I find with these is that you generate tremendous energy in the community. They get excited. These events take place at the same time, and you really have great success in doing so.
And then another method that we use is doing a driving tour to make sure that the entire consultant team really understands the community, but then also site visits to key attractions. So that can sometimes be, a large business, that can be special districts, just large access to the community to make sure that we really understand the culture of the community and what those specific assets and things drive. So like, for example, in that picture, we're at a winery, getting to know about that because that was a big part of the culture of the community. And so really, I guess the thing that I want to drive home before I kind of hand it back off to Francois is that all of these different methods of engagement, not everyone maybe is going to engage with each specific one, but they're designed to get input from all different types of people in the community so that it is equitable, like I said, and not just equal, that we hear from everyone, whether, they just moved here, they have thought they were never going to be heard from before, whatever it might be, we want to reach every type of person. So I'll hand it back to you from there, Francois.
Well, thank you so much, Prisha. I appreciate that. And I want to have Ryan also share some thoughts. But the next slide really is to help you see the number of touch points that we have with the community. This indicates all the different events, meetings, the email blast, all of those are represented on this sheet. For instance, just for meetings alone, we have 8 steering committee meetings. Interviews, we have got 11 interviews. Focus group meetings, there are 16. Public meetings, 7. And then we have meetings in a box. Now, what those meetings refer to, that's when we as consultants put together a presentation. And then the community volunteers, the different, maybe the Main Street Board, different civic organizations, they go out and they do the presentations. In other words, they become the hands and feet of the consultant or the hands and feet of staff to go out and share it with the community, whether it's in a church, whether it's a Rotary Club. The man on the street engagement, obviously there are those that were identified by Lisa, but I want to point out those public events. A farmer's market, great place to do that, but then a city festival as well. There's the surveys, there's the digital outreach that she mentioned. And then if you look at the 2-day events, both of them, there you can start seeing how, for instance, for the visioning, there will be 3 interviews, 2 the first day, 1 the next day. Focus group meetings, one day, 1 the next day. There will be a public meeting, probably the first night. And then the next day, as we do the discussions of the outcome of these meetings, we will have that visioning session. And so that is extremely successful in how you engage the community. With the 2-day design charrette, we'll start with a walking tour. We want everyone that's interested, come and walk with us in downtown that morning and share with us what are the issues that they see, what are the concerns that they have. We will share with you our observations, but together we want to walk your downtown. And then we're going to have these 4 sessions during those 2 days. 2 sessions on the first day, 2 sessions on the next day. Again, a public meeting, and then we will share the results of that. And something I want to share with you that I experienced firsthand in the city of Terrell. I reached out to one of the merchants. It was his building, beautiful building. He had a coffee shop, but he really felt that the city wasn't really taking care of him. In fact, at one point we stood at this entrance of his coffee shop, and a truck came by, and it was so noisy. And he said, this is what I sit with, and nobody listens to me. Anyway, during the charrette, I made a point of having him there. We engaged him. We had him part of the exercises, so that at the end of that 2-day charrette, him as well as a few other people of downtown, they told us, they said, it's the first time ever that the city has listened to us. And when I spoke to the city manager about it, he laughed. He said, we've spoken a lot to these guys, but they just feel they're not heard, perhaps. So the fact that we were able to be there to give them exercises to engage with, share with us their ideas, they felt they were heard. They felt they were part of the process, and that's what we constantly do with these plans of ours. What I would like to ask maybe Ryan to talk a little bit about how can we incorporate the volunteers and the citizens group in helping with this effort. Ryan.
And just to piggyback off of what Francois was just saying, I think going through a process like this is extremely therapeutic for a community because it gets them involved, it gets people heard, and it creates pride. And when you can create civic pride, not just with the usual suspects that always show up at public meetings, that are always involved and on boards, but you can really reach all those individuals and communities, that's when you can really make some things happen in your community. And so, as I think Brisa and Francois did a great job of outlining this process, our challenge, of course, is we want to reach everybody, and we want to have all these engagement touch points, but at the same time, we want to be very mindful of budget and fee and make sure that we're balancing those two things. And so we're really working hard to make sure that we're using digital to help us reach people that we can reach digitally and be really smart about how we spend the city's time and money. That way, when we save our more in-person events and focus things where we have to be in person talking to those people and reaching those people that we can't reach. And so one of those other ways that Francois wanted me to speak to is how can we leverage volunteers and city staff, and that is with some of the meeting in a box and creating some of this content to where an HOA could go run their own mini meeting just about their neighborhood and go through a series of slides on topics and answer some things and have discussions. You can turn that back into the consultant team so the consultant team can learn. And that's a really effective and efficient way to do that, because if you're having to pay for the consultants to come every time and run every meeting that we will those. And so we want to be really smart with your time and your money. And so that's why we have a really robust toolbox that we walked you through to show you all those different tools and tactics that we have. It is a bit of an agile process. We have to lock it down from a scoping standpoint, but all along the process, so that we're true to our word about being equitable with engagement, is we're going to be tracking who have we heard from, but more importantly, who have we not heard from. And we might surface certain groups and individuals that we feel we need to make that extra effort to go reach. And that's where that persona-based approach that Brisa talked about, we might find that there's a group that if we reached out to a church leader or an organization, that they could reach their demographic, and that could really, help satisfy that for us. So definitely excited about this project. I think it's really smart for city leadership to do all of these plans together. And I want to know how important I think the civic pride component of this is in doing engagement the right way. That can be a real game changer for a lot of communities.
So thank you for that, Ryan, for sharing that. What I also would like to point out is that, a plan like this provides the opportunity to educate the community, to educate, the people, the man on the street. But even what we've experienced, sometimes for a councilman, it's the first time ever that he's involved or she's involved with a comprehensive plan or a downtown plan. It's the first time perhaps that the Main Street Board has the opportunity to do downtown plan. So there's a lot of education that we can make part of this process and help make people understand the principles of planning and the way that we look at how people are affected by decisions that we make about the built environment. So thank you for that. So to follow up then on the public participation, I would like to ask Jason to talk about the economics component, because that, after all, is a very important aspect of this plan. Jason.
Thank you, Francois. Obviously, economics is an important part of the process. A lot of our work will be establishing what is the existing conditions, the economic, the demographic baselines, what is the market capacity for different residential types, how to improve the commercial vitality and the viability for attraction of downtown concepts and restaurants. We'll be looking at opportunities to infill the I-69 corridor. And then ultimately, I think a lot of our work will be taking all the vision sessions and the input that we get, and how can we apply that in a feasible, fundable, constructible way that includes application of the I-69 corridor. And then we also have committed to supporting the planning process to understand what's the market demand for housing. How can we look at your existing neighborhoods, what's working, what's not working, maybe some missing middle, but in a way that's context sensitive, and ultimately, how can we grow the pie? That could be through new commercial, that can include employment, that can include small office, it could be incremental demand, maker space, new housing, helping identify housing types that's maybe is got more capacity that's not being satisfied. And then more importantly, a lot of it's just looking at ways to improve your existing neighborhood or your existing demand, your downtown environment, essentially to increase, greater sustainability and vitality among your existing conditions. So we'll be looking at a lot of baseline work. We're familiar with Nacogdoches. We did some work early on, and we'll be building off of that to help inform the planning process and take all of these ideas and make sure that it's feasible, fundable, constructible in a very incremental way that ultimately builds upon the vision that you guys are looking for.
Well, thank you for that, Jason. And, I really want to emphasize, again, the fact of activating especially your downtown. And Jason is extremely good, he and his team, helping with activating an area so that there is more investment, so that there's more excitement and success in a place like that. So, yes.
No, I was going to say that's a great point. I mean, we're helping a lot of cities acquire parcels that maybe hold out, or helping create catalyst properties, or coordinating RFPs to make sure that we align, what the city's vision is with the development opportunities, and then, obviously activating larger areas with, special finance districts, PIDs, TERS, those kind of things. So once we understand what your vision is, we can align those with the appropriate regulatory tools. So I'm glad Jay's in the room, and the right financial tools, and the incentive package to work with the EDC and your staff to align the tools that you have to activate the plan.
And the last thing I want to ask you, Jason, to talk about a little bit is some infill opportunities that we may have in this community, both in terms of revitalizing certain neighborhoods, but at the same time also looking at how can we do some infill. What would be your thoughts be about that?
Yeah, I'd mentioned a little bit before in terms of our emphasis placed on incremental development. I think, finding opportunities to create infill housing with, quality, context-sensitive design. I think one thing that we recognized in part of the interview process is, the opportunity to continue the placemaking. I think, obviously Nacogdoches has a wonderful downtown. There's some very complicated assets and buildings. We understand historic tax credits and some of the complications that are to activate some of those commercial buildings. And then there's some large-scale developments, obviously with the I-69 corridor and some, new greenfield space. I think there's some opportunities for larger-scale development that we can certainly recommend based on our experience across Texas.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jason. I appreciate that. So at this point, I would like to share with you, so what does the bottom line comes to? What does it cost to do all of this? And what this chart points out indicates remember all the different tasks. It indicates the fee structure for each of those tasks. It talks about the number of hours spent on that particular task. But it also then have the percentages of each of these individual tasks indicated. And I hear a lot of feedback. If anyone can switch off their sound, it may be helpful. Perfect, thank you. So what you will see from the public participation, for instance, that is 27%, and that is really a good percentage to consider for that effort because it is so important. But then as you look at, for instance, the effort and time spent on whether it's your comprehensive plan, your downtown master plan, all of that is so important, and I think a good percentage of effort is spent to that. Now, what we did was we look at the number here, and I think the city manager may want to add some thoughts here as well. But it came to a number that we thought about: how can we creatively look at ways to not only bring the direct cost down that's spent on this, but also from the source of where it comes from, but also how can we engage others in your community. So the idea is we are looking at if we can take out the market analysis, the economics and fee associated with comprehensive plan and the corridor, and that comes to about a 50,000 number, by the way. If we have a group like the university participate in that, then we can actually talk about a number of 427 and almost 428, but that being the fee that we look at. And then at the next slide, then you see the new breakdown of, again, percentages, the exact fee and percentages associated with that. So that just helps you to see and understand what the fee structure of this looks like. So at the same time, there are opportunities to optimize effort. And one, but I just mentioned the one about getting the university to be involved, but perhaps there is other ways too. We can have staff help us compile background data. That is a huge support for a project like this. GIS mapping, having that in a shape and form that is easily used and applied, was also a way for collaboration with staff. One very good way of looking at this is if staff can help to summarize the current review and approval processes that you have, because obviously you have them in place and you want to know, do they work well? Should they be revised? But it helps if someone else, like on your city staff, can do the review and perhaps share with us what it looks like today. Technical support and review always is very helpful, especially when it comes to infrastructure, any of those elements that are essential to look at. From an engagement point of view, there are great opportunities. We want you to help us identify stakeholders. Who are the people that we should be at focus group meetings? Who are the people that we should have interviews with? Typically, we have interviews with what I call the movers and shakers of the town. Those people that have a long history, that can share a lot, and I want to talk to them. I want to have one-on-one interviews to hear about the issues that I as a consultant need to know about as I do the plan. Translations, that is a great help by staff. Additional digital outreach. For instance, your IT group can perhaps help sending out some of those questions that we want to send out regularly. We mentioned earlier that the man on the street engagement, great opportunity for having various civic groups and even the university students go out and have intercept surveys, and that they actually can learn at the same time. But using them again as your hands and feet for the city is a great benefit. And then obviously helping with logistics and support for public meetings and events. That's how we can collaborate between the city staff and the team. So just a few things I would like to share with you before we go into Q&A is that if you look at the rural-urban continuum, meaning you look at the metro areas, and then you look at the non-metro areas, you ask yourself, well, where does Nacogdoches fall? Again, this map shows the non-metro versus the metro, but there is an index. And index 5 is the one that refers to Nacogdoches County. So in this continuum, category 5 is the one that we need to look at. So what you can also do, if you look closely, is that the categories 4 to 6 range are very close in nature, in similarities to category 5. So the total of counties that have a 4, 5, and 6 category identification comes to about 84. 84 of all of your counties here in Texas are that classification. What is interesting, though, and I really want to share this with you, is that us as a team have worked in at least 47 of the 84 reference Texas counties. That means that we know small communities. We understand communities like yourselves, and we feel confident that we can truly help you, even though we come from a national perspective, a national experience point of view. With again, with Danny, with KSA and Bob, and with Michael on the ground, we have that connecting piece whereby we can truly use our experience to blend it with what is possible in Nacogdoches. The question may be, well, why the comprehensive plan? Why actually update it? You know, why? And that's part of that education part that I said earlier, is be very helpful if that can be built into some of the presentations, the meetings, etc. Well, first of all, your current plan is out of date. I think it was done 2013, I believe, but it's out of date. And it does not really reflect the latest urban planning and design trends. You know, you think about retail today. Retail is all about experiential destination. It's about what do you offer people other than just buying something, because after all, everyone just buy, they just buy online. And by the way, I misspoken. The existing plan is 2003. So that is 18 years old, and that is truly an old plan. Typically, plans are updated every 10 years. That's a good time period to think about updating your plan. Some cities that see great growth, and I've been part of cities like that, where every 5 years they need a new plan because there's so much growth. No, not that you had that type of growth that justify every 5 years a plan, but I tell you, an 18-year-old plan is definitely out of date. Also, the current plan, it doesn't respond to changes in the community. You know, there have been changes since 18 years ago. You have the I-69 development that impacts what you need to do today. There's the ride sharing that's a new phenomena around here. We need to be aware of that. It needs to be built into this new plan. If you think about your comprehensive plan on the website, there's different ways these days how you can make it very easily navigable. 20 years ago, when not all plans were actually on the web yet, there were just not good ways to make it easy to access and to read it without actually printing it out. The other aspect of why you need a plan is that you really lack housing diversity. Because if you think about it, the middle housing that you need is really prevalent in Nacogdoches. And so we need that diversity of housing so everyone can be accommodated. You do a plan because you want to get funding, and you cannot get funding if you don't have a plan. So that is just a very simple equation there to consider. But then also, an update is really necessary in terms of reflecting the vision of the community. And why is it important? It's because that without a vision or without a plan, you just don't have any direction. And if you don't have direction, you really don't have a purpose, if you think about it. So what we think about a plan or a vision is that when funding becomes available, when there are organizations that have grants available, if you have a plan, they can help you. If you have no plan, how can they help you? They don't even know how they can help you. Another example, if TxDOT comes and they want to do a new improvement, well, if there's no plan, they will do what is good for them. But if you have a plan, they will be forced to do what you have in your plan. And that's what we want to get at, is having plans in such a condition that everyone else will abide to the plans that you've established for yourself. You ask yourself, what about the downtown master plan? Why is that important? Well, first of all, a vibrant downtown is very important because that is what will make you keep you being a destination for people to want to come to. The downtown functions as the heart of Nacogdoches. It's all about this is Nacogdoches. If you arrive there, that's what I feel when every time I go to Nacogdoches, when I arrive in that square that you have where the information center is, I feel I've arrived. I am in Nacogdoches. So downtown is really a driving factor if you think about it in the brand of the city. That's how you sell yourself. That's how people know about it. It's an economic driver. of course. And then also that's a good way to retain your students as they enjoy the amenities that's offered there. But downtown is underutilized. It has so much potential, and we want to help you realize that potential. So we know downtown will change, and a plan is needed for that change. Not so, but what is important though, if you don't have a good plan in place, other people will decide for you, and it may not be what you want. So rather now put the shoulders to the effort, and let's create a plan that's your plan that determine your future. And then finally, if you want the true potential of downtown to be realized, you need gravity A operators. You need placemaking where events can take place, where people feel welcome, where there can be various events at the same time in different places. And also you need quality amenities, of course. So why would you think about us doing this for you? You may ask. Well, our understanding of Nacogdoches is, number one, is that you have a tremendous history. You consider the oldest town in Texas. And that gives it such a wonderful feel. As I mentioned earlier, when I arrive every time in Nacogdoches, I enjoy visiting your downtown. But the fact that you have the university there as well, that's unique. To have a university and the town together to really be referred to as a town and gown in a positive way, meaning that there's tremendous cultural opportunities, there's entertainment, there's arts and sports because of the university, and we can benefit from that for your community as well. Beautiful natural features, the gardens, I mentioned that earlier. You have unique offerings, you have unique potential. There's huge tourism potential. In fact, already you have many tourists come, but the potential is there for even more so. And then why us? Why the Ddj team? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have the national expert, but we have the local presence. So we make sure that we balance our viewpoint with the local presence. We're planners, we're designers, we're engineers. We cover the full spectrum when it comes to planning and designing for a community. There are trends out there are innovations that happen every day. Every day we learn about something new. Well, we will bring it to you so you know about it. But what is important, though, I want to emphasize this item here, is that we always start with you, the community. We don't come with our ideas and superimpose it on you. No, no, no. What we do is we start with you as being the foundation. And then we listen. We listen, we listen, we listen, and listen again, because it's what you tell us that's important that we want to respond to. But with that, we think about the future. Finally, we are passionate. We are extremely excited about this opportunity to do this project for you. And as I said earlier, we will listen to you with intent. But with that, we will be responsible in what we do with the information so that we are responsive in our delivery. So with that, Elena. And we don't have sound. Thank you.
Mario, do we want to open it up for questions from the council?
Yeah, from council, questions for certainly for Francois and his team.
Who wants to start? I know everybody's got questions.
Mine is going to be short. Thank you, Mayor. One of the things, I'm not against the plan, but this plan is based on, I would say, one Nacogdoches. But the problem is we don't have a one Nacogdoches this time. We have community here, and then we have community there. This plan is great for one community. But, and this plan is not, I'm not blaming the plan. Right now, we have a Nacogdoches issue. But there are certain communities in Nacogdoches we need to go and revitalize that before, in my opinion, we put this plan into. It's like to speak of housing shortage. We don't have a housing shortage. We have a housing shortage in certain neighborhoods. But we have a lot of housing opportunities in neighborhoods, low income, rundown, pure rate. So housing shortage really is not total Nacogdoches. That's all I'm gonna say.
I would like for Ryan to perhaps answer the question. Ryan.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. And the best way that I know to answer that question is to kind of give you an analogy. And this is something that we do in pretty much every presentation and talk that we give. And so, you know, at Civic Brand, we really focus on what is a community's brand, what is the community's identity. And so the analogy to when you say one Nacogdoches, but we're really all these different, you know, pieces. If you take a look at a brand like Toyota, for example, when you look at the Toyota brand and you think about their different audiences, you know, on one hand, you have a pickup truck audience that needs things to be rugged and tough and durable. But then on the other hand, you have the Prius audience that wants things to be environmentally friendly and hip and cool. They've got the minivan audience and an audience that's bought the brand Toyota for generations, right? And so when they're focusing on building their brand, Toyota can't overly commit to anyone. They can't go too far to the trucks, too far to the Prius. And so instead what they do is they look for, well, what's that common thread? What's the shared values that all of those different groups share? And I think in Toyota's case, they would say that it's quality and dependability, that whether you want the rugged truck or you want the Prius, you want it to be quality and dependable. And so they build the brand on quality and dependability. And then that brand then allows them that as a platform that elevates kind of the ocean that rises all ships, and then they can go market the trucks and market the Prius. And how that's relevant to the community like Nacogdoches is just like the truck and all the different audiences. You have a lot of different audiences. You have young, old, those that are new to the community, those that have been here for generations. You know, all these people want something different out of the community, and Nacogdoches means something different to them. And we can't let any one group or voice overly steer the plan. And so through engagement, that's how we find those same things, those common threads. By doing really deep, equitable engagement, we'll find those common threads and find those shared values for what is the shared platform of Nacogdoches and build a comp plan that supports all of those. And that, again, raises all ships to where people can go do their special interests and they can do what benefits them and what they're interested in, but it doesn't do so at the expense of others. And so that kind of approach is how at least our firm kind of approaches that angle of it because of the equitable engagement. We're going to surface what are your version of quality and dependability. And then I know that some of the other team members can speak to from their expertise, you know, how they approach some of the different, you know, demographics and neighborhoods and things, because really at the end of the day, any city is just a collection of different neighborhoods, right? And so it's all about coming together and finding what makes Nacogdoches one.
I mean, I understand what you just said, and now that what I was saying. You have, like Toyota, each one of those products they put out are quality products. We have different neighborhoods, great neighborhoods, and we have neighborhoods that's deteriorating, and it's not a great product. If we're selling up, if someone is moving here, want to move to Nacogdoches, they'll never shown certain neighborhoods. That analogy doesn't work with this neighborhood situation.
So I think I'd like to follow up on Mr. Bolden's question, because we may be the most diverse economically, racially community that you might have worked with. And partly because we are more rural, I think, than people you've worked with. You looked at the rural urban continuum codes, but you lumped in the 4s and the 6s. Both of those are adjacent to a metro area. We are a little bubble because we're not adjacent to a metro area. We're not only non-metro, but we're a large enough city, and we aren't next to any other large city. So we don't have people moving back and forth for work to, for example, Dallas. You're talking about Terrell. People move back and forth out of Terrell. So a 5, a rural urban continuum code of 5 is very different from the 4s and the 6s. In fact, it may be more like a 7 and the 9s. And that brings into play what Mr. Bolden's talking about our economically and racially and ethnically diverse community here. We may be very different. We're only one of 82 of those 92 in the whole United States, because we don't draw on that metro area. So I just wanted to add, we have constraints that other communities might not have because of their adjacency. So I don't know what experiences you've had in such, in communities like that.
Any thoughts?
You were muted. What was the comment?
Sorry, Jason, I thought you may want to share something there.
Our entire team is fairly diverse, but we've all worked in extremely diverse communities where maybe more African American or maybe Indians in New Mexico. And I think the key is, and Ryan, you said it right, is celebrating the diversity, but also using this plan as an opportunity to understand and underwrite what are the common denominators that are important for the community as a whole to grow and leverage, and celebrate the uniqueness of the heritage and celebrate the diversity, but also find ways to create common denominators for the planning process to leverage on that essentially we can celebrate. And those are, maybe it's active living or connected community or the historic nature. And I think through this process, we'll figure out those common denominators that are important to your community and celebrate those that can unify and unite the community together in a way and mitigate some of the issues in terms of affordability or diversity or equity. All of those things will also be part of the process, looking at housing, looking at opportunities downtown, looking at opportunities to create small business, opportunities to attract corporate business. So anyway, we're going to look at all these issues and try to mitigate and celebrate the uniqueness across all cohorts.
I would like to add one other thing. We've done work in cities where there are different needs in different parts of the community because all the community is not built at the same time. You have neighborhoods that are older, that the infrastructure is not holding up, and there needs to be serious investment, whether it's from code enforcement to infrastructure and stabilizing the property values and working with the property owners to improve their properties. And you work in communities where we have kind of identified here are the neighborhoods that need the highest intervention, and here are the neighborhoods that are stable. We don't want them to go through the decline. So identifying those on the front end and nuancing the recommendations based on the level of intervention needed, and knowing that, hey, maybe this is a citywide issue that needs fairly significant investment in infrastructure. Maybe it's drainage, it's maybe there is a big floodplain issue, and so trying to identify those and working with the comprehensive plan framework to say these places, areas are going great, the private investment is kind of driving a lot of the development and it's going great, but here are the areas where the city needs to look at and dig down and make more recommendations on that.
I am not. This is a good plan. I like the plan, but is it a plan that's really inclusive of Nacogdoches? That's my question.
That's what we're going to be working on in the next year and a half, and that's the reason why we would want everyone's input and your feedback to make sure that as we undertake the process, we are incorporating that. So understanding that is a very important element as we go through this process.
Councilmember, can I also address that? I think that's also why, through this process, we want to have that citizen committee that's associated with both of these things. And while, obviously you can't have, from a committee management, you can't have a committee so large with, scores and scores of people because it's just variability it can't be managed. So you do have to have a smaller group, but I think that does lend us the opportunity, working with staff, working with the consultant, to open doors and open doors to places that they would never be able to because they're not familiar. Certainly areas that staff can't, just because we may not have those connections with those those community members, those citizens that have been, you all have identified to be on those groups, they can help us. And it's not just window dressing. I mean, there is some expectations of these committees to show up, to be present, to help open doors, to help facilitate meetings, take notes, I mean, to assist, honestly, to be the ears and the voices in the community, to be able to share to and from what's going on, whether it was the last time the consultants were here, and to get that feedback, and vice versa, pass that on to the consultants. I mean, that is just one area where we have to have that connection point to the community, because it can't just be staff and the consultants.
But I guess one of my questions is, why we don't already have that in place? If you look around, there's probably one or two that's represent certain neighborhoods compared to the rest of the neighborhood. You know, we want to have that committee in plan, interactive, and we should already have that in plan.
We'll make sure that Ryan's outreach and our homework in terms of neighborhoods and really, comprehensive citywide will address all of these issues. We'll make sure that the process is inclusive and also really appreciates equity throughout the entire planning process.
Ms. Fisher.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. My questions have to do with sort of the same concerns regarding inclusivity. The thing that you said about persona-based strategies to get to hard-to-reach communities, is that more of a philosophy underpinning, or I guess guiding, informing the strategies you employ, or can you give me a concrete example of what you mean by that?
Yeah, it's both. So it's a guiding philosophy of just our firm and how we approach things. But to give you kind of more specifics, so in a lot of projects we start out with here's a spreadsheet, and we work with the committee and staff to help us. Here are all of the different possible groups in the community, split up a lot of different ways, demographics, how long they've been there, whatever it might be, right? And then what are the subgroups within those? So are there different community organizations, things like that? And then we identify what are ways that through our just expertise and experience, they respond really well to in terms of engagement, right? So we have this list for all of these groups. Group A loves to go to public meetings. Group B will never attend a public meeting in their life, right? And then so that the strategies that we use are very tailored to that specific group. And then Ryan kind of alluded to earlier, constantly checking our work. So there's a broad range of things we can do to try to reach as many different people as possible, but we can reference that list of here's the groups, the subgroups, the ways they want to be engaged with, the ways they won't respond to, and see, all right, we've heard a lot from these groups, we have not heard from these groups here, so we need to do extra work to make sure that we're listening and get their input.
Okay, thank you.
So actually, maybe I should ask Ryan, can you give an actual example, perhaps?
Yeah, for sure. So, when we do engagement, to just take a simple one, because this has happened across multiple projects. When we're looking at who's responding to surveys, in most communities, regardless of how diverse they are, there's often, we're getting less of a Hispanic population responding to surveys and coming to public meetings, right? And so a natural response is to translate the website into Spanish, translate the survey into Spanish, put materials in Spanish, and you'll see that when you do that, you don't really get that big of a bump on responses to some of those surveys. You'll get some more, but there's oftentimes, depending on the group, and like Risa said, there's multiple ways that we slice and dice this. It's not just demographics. Sometimes it might be foodies, people that are into sports, different ways to do it. But in the Hispanic population example, the reason we surface those organizations and individuals is because then we can go to those organizations and we can go to those leaders within that community, and we can make them become champions of the project, and then they can take that message to their peers. And that's going to be far more effective than, a 40-year-old white male coming and saying, hey, you need to take this survey, this is why it's important. Instead, maybe it's somebody from their church then telling that group of why is this important to our group? Why is this important to our neighborhood, to our needs? And we've done this in countless communities across the country. Same thing with other consultants on this. And so there's a lot of rural, there's a lot of small, there's a lot of diversity that we've all addressed. And it just looks slightly different in every community, but kind of those approaches for identifying who are those, in our world we call them brand champions, but really it's kind of just community champions that can go be a spokesperson for that group and community. And that's the best way to bring that group along.
I also would like to add to what Ryan just said now. What I really like about Civic Brand is that they don't have a plan in place that is static. It's flexible, meaning as they do the plan, as they do meetings, and they learn about that group has not been represented, that one is not there. We've just heard about that other group over there. Never you knew about it. They will go out of their way to make sure that there are opportunities to reach them. So they're never static. They're absolutely flexible, making sure that there's follow-up, and we take all those possibilities to be able to reach people that in the past has been hard to reach.
Thank you. The surveys you guys mentioned conducting, it seems clear that those are going to be electronic. How else are they going to be dispersed to the community?
I can take this one, y'all. So yeah, definitely online, right? But then also paper surveys, we do that a lot too. So for example, we were doing some work with Garland, and we had an online survey running there, and we threw a public event, and people could scan a QR code and get the survey and do whatever they wanted, right? But also at that same event, we had paper versions of the survey. In kind of the translation way, so they might be offered in multiple languages. But then another thing that I think is really important to point out is that it's not necessarily a direct translation, but sometimes the term transcreation is a little bit more accurate because it's thinking about what makes sense in the context of that community in that language, and not just like straight, take this question that's in English, have it translated directly into Spanish, call it good. It's all about context and the nuance of that.
Yeah. And the other thing to just add to that is that Breeze is talking about specifically the survey, but all of those man on the street type of events where we're walking around, we're essentially collecting survey questions directly in person, talking to those people. As well as the meeting in a box where, as an example, somebody might run an HOA meeting of just their neighborhood. And, so we're collecting it in a lot of different formats. So there's definitely opportunity for people that are comfortable going online and doing surveys.
Okay, a bit of a follow-up on that. Say you're posting a survey online, and you're obviously going to have paper copies of it. Passing it out at one community event is that community event is probably a little microcosm of the Nacogdoches community. So how do you make sure that printed survey that is the same as the one online gets to other people?
I would suggest we utilize our committees, because again, they're kind of they should have those connection points. We can certainly have them here at the library, the rec center, getting to those committee members. And honestly, if we have to print them and deliver them to those committee members, and they happen to be a pastor of church, or they happen to be whatever the case may be, we can give it to them based on how they see it being sent out. And it may be that it may be emailed to someone, but can they print it? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do that. That we certainly can do that. I mean, certainly the instrument itself is produced by the consultant, but how we replicate it and how we get there, we can do it here because we're here, we're present. We can make sure that that's done.
Yeah, and you're also starting to get into, I don't know if this is part of where your question is going is, there's a lot of surveys that when you talk about like a statistically valid survey and things like that, where they very intentionally will want it to be a random sampling, right? Because you're absolutely right that if we go to an SFA football game, we're going to get a certain audience. If we go to an HOA group, we're going to get a specific audience. What I think is more valuable than the pure random sampling is to take what our persona and agile-based approach, because by identifying all these different groups, we don't just have a top-level number of, we want to hear from X number of people. Within every subgroup, we want to hear from X number of people. And so as we're doing that, we're going to be able to see, hey, we're getting great survey results. And we might look down and call them and say, but Hispanic speakers under the age of 30, we've got none. And so we need to put that extra effort and go reach them. And that's really the only way that you can do that. If it's just random, you're just going to be blasting and blasting, because there are going to be those groups that are so hard to reach that you spend your entire budget just trying to reach that one group via phone survey. And so the absolute best way and most effective way to do that is to take that agile, like Francois was talking about, and persona-based, like Risa was talking about, approach to constantly tracking who are we hearing from, but most importantly, who are we not hearing from, and what do we need to do to hear from them.
Thank you. And my last set of questions, we're getting a couple in there. I saw a lot of online-based strategy, email, social media, the interactive map, the website, which means that in terms of reaching communities that don't have access or don't use the internet regularly, it places a lot of weight and importance on the other strategies, including the public meeting, the focus group, and the interviews. And so I'm wondering, I guess, a couple of specific questions. First of all, I understand, I guess, that the focus groups and the steering committees are different. How do you guys put together the focus groups? Who makes that call, and how are those people selected?
Yeah, definitely, different interest groups, demographics, kind of depending on our, conversations with the city. So we work with you, with the committee, to figure out who are those groups that, that's going to make sense for a focus group. We need to talk to this person one-on-one, whatever it might be. So that's kind of a back and forth process, right? But then really, I think the large, you talk about there's a lot of online stuff, and that is definitely like the most efficient way to reach a wide group of people. But obviously there are tons of people that don't want to do that, or don't get on Facebook, or don't have whatever it might be, right? That's where we really lean on the man on the street stuff, and meeting people where they're at, but also the community, and building those connections and having them, help us get the word out. Going to those specific, that church leader that can help us reach a certain audience. Building those kind of one-to-one personal connections is more offline, I guess, piece of
it. From my perspective, just as a point, not a question, I think that's going to be super important.
Absolutely.
In this community. What are the interviews? It said interviews multiple times. What does that mean? Is that the man on the street stuff that you guys are talking about, or is it separate interviews with
Right. I would like to answer that question. Yes. So how we do this? How we do these interviews is that we specifically make them one-to-one, meaning it's one person that we talk to, because we have learned that if you have two people in the discussion, a person is not candid, he's not as open about sharing. So we want to identify those 10 individuals that truly are, as I said, the movers and shakers of the community, and it has influence. The history, you have such a tremendous history in Nacogdoches. We want to know about those people that have been there for many generations, and talk to some of those individuals, but one-to-one, because that's when you really get the answer that you need to know about those issues that are true to your community. So to answer you, interviews are typically one-to-one, and focus group meetings are when it's a group of people, and that can be a specific interest group, or it can be a mix of interest groups, but it's more than one person basically.
Yeah, and if I can, I'd like to go back to a little bit to address your earlier comment about the balance of the digital and the in-person stuff, because you're right. I agree with you 1,000% that that's going to make that in person so important to reach those groups. And what you will see with a lot of firms, especially coming out of COVID, there's a lot of firms that they had to figure out how to do digital pretty quickly because everybody was forced to. At Civic, we've been doing digital for years prior to COVID. And that's because, like Teresa said, it's not just good enough to hold a public meeting and expect to come to you. But I want to make sure, a point that I want to make really clear is when we talk about a really elaborate digital approach, that's not, there are firms that I would say get too cute with digital. Everything's trying to be fancy and Facebook and do that. That's just as, going all digital is just as bad as only having a public meeting. We're just all of a sudden swapping audiences. You're going from the audience that came to the public meeting to now an audience that only has Facebook. What having that robust digital toolbox does is because our firm, we'd go do interviews and focus groups with every single person in the town, but you'd have $1 million engagement budget, right? So we can use digital to effectively and efficiently reach everybody that's very comfortable communicating in that way. We can get all of that out of the way in a very efficient way. That frees up our time and the city's budget to make sure that those in-person things that we're doing, the man on the street, the focus groups, reaching out to a church owner to make sure his congregation is responding to a survey, doing a senior citizen focus group, doing a youth event. We're being real efficient because I think I really, obviously I'm biased, but I think it would be very hard to find a firm that is more committed to doing an equitable approach to engagement. I think you'll find a lot that will hype up the digital tools, but they're going to lack on the in-person. And so we use digital, again, to free up budget and space so that our in-person stuff is very meaningful and it's targeted at those that we need to reach in person.
That's super helpful. Thank you. And I have my last one. Okay. The public meetings that you guys are going to host, and you sort of already answered this question with multi-pronged approaches and strategies that you're taking to reach other people who might not want to come to public meetings. But how do you guys make sure that those public meetings are as inclusive as possible?
Yeah, so I can answer that one as well. A big part of it is promoting the public meetings. I think the biggest, my biggest complaint about civic public meetings is most people find out about them after they happened. And they're like, man, did you hear what happened at the public meeting? We should have been there. And they get mad. And so I think the biggest thing is just that awareness, which I think ties into a lot of the different things that we're going to do with the project branding. I think we even have a budget for trying to do some promotional products and print the project branding on tote bags and giveaways. Having the project website capture emails and every time trying to capture emails or cell phone numbers so that we can bring people back into the process. And so I think the first thing is awareness. There needs to be zero excuse that somebody doesn't know that meeting was happening. That's the first thing. Thing is just at the actual meeting itself, making sure that people do have a really good opportunity to participate. That's why the public meetings will also have that virtual engagement room opportunity, because if you're aware of it, but it's happening while you're at work or you've got kids at home, or you just want to spend more time thinking about the answer, you have that virtual option to participate and engage on your own time. We don't want one person to speak and kind of dominate the conversation and everybody else not have an opportunity to speak. So those are kind of the two biggest ways, at least civic brand plays a role, is just making sure everybody knows about it, and then once people know about it, making sure that everybody has an opportunity to engage and participate, even if it's not that moment in person. I don't know, Francois, if anybody else has anything else to elaborate on that.
I just want to add the point about the fact that these days everyone has a cell phone. In different socioeconomic groups, you would find that everyone will have a cell phone, at least probably the majority of 99% of the people. And that's a wonderful device that you have in your hand that we can reach people with. So think about digital as that as being a tremendous tool that you can use. The other thing I really want to point out is that if you look at this in terms of the different focus groups, what we sometimes do is purposefully mix and match to get sometimes people with different viewpoints, different opinions, in the same room. Because if you do that, you create empathy. People learn about someone else's need. I had the experience. I had a meeting with sports people, and I had the baseball people and the football people in the same room. And they both had a big need for additional facilities. But once the baseball people heard about the football people's need, that is truly dire. They said, "My goodness, we never knew that you have so little. We really have a lot compared to you. So we are prepared to step and be a little bit on the back burner so that you can have your needs met." So what it did was it created empathy. And that's why we sometimes purposefully combine groups for that purpose.
Thank you.
Mr. Anderson?
Really, everybody else has pretty much covered all of my specific questions, and I think they're all very valid concerns, and they're concerns that I shared, especially as far as the broad-based community engagement. But I would like to say that I think part of the responsibility for ensuring all of those things lies with us and lies with the committee, and we have some real responsibility to make sure that that does happen, and to make sure that the corners of the community about which we're concerned are being reached. We can't just rely on the consultants alone to make that happen. I think we have to if we're going to get into this process, I think we have to commit ourselves to having a real part in that, and make sure that the people on the committee as well have an understanding that we have some expectation there of that same thing. And beyond that, I think everybody else has covered really all my concerns.
Okay. I've got it. My turn.
Go ahead.
No, I will. Yeah, I know. I'll be back to you. One of mine that kind of follows up a little bit to Ms. Bellinger is, so tell me about a community that you've worked in that's maybe most similar to ours, that has some of the opportunities, say downtown, but also some of the challenges, maybe, a lack of low, moderate income housing and blight in neighborhoods. Do you have something in mind?
Absolutely. I do want to share with you a specific project that, interesting enough, the majority of our team that is on this project has been on that project as well. And that is the city of Terrell. We looked at their comprehensive plan at the same time that we did the downtown plan. So very similar in your situation. In fact, when I explained earlier how we did our visioning sessions and our design charrettes, that's what we applied there, and it was very successful. What we had in Terrell specifically was there was a big divide between the north and the south, and the railroad was the divide. And we looked at ways specifically to combine those two communities from the racial differences, economic differences that there may be, to make sure that we can look at how we create those connections, and then also how we transition into the outside communities. That's one example. I'm sure that others would like to share some other ideas as well. Another one that I worked on was the city of Ennis. Ennis is not close to a metro area, and the city of Ennis had a very interesting situation whereby they had really emphasized industry for many, many years. But by doing so, they've never addressed any quality of life amenities. The result was that they have all these industries, but the managers didn't want to live in Ennis. They all live in Waxahachie or they live in Dallas, because there was no quality amenities and not quality housing. So what we did was about 5 years ago, and Jay and I very closely worked on that. We identified that as being a big issue, that they need quality facilities, quality housing. So that's what we did. We had our vision set, our objectives, our goals, all were based on improving quality of life. And the tremendous thing about that is that today, 5 years later, you can see the change. It is the type of growth that they see right now, and only because they invested in the quality of life that's needed to attract the people that you want to be there. It was not because of a big city that's close by or a metro area, because they are already on their own, but because of them focusing on quality of life, trails, parks, the downtown, beautiful downtown. Now they have the interest of people wanting to live there, and they want managers to live there as well.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to add, when you talk about comparables and comparable communities, anytime you point at one community for how it's similar, you can probably then point at ways that the community is dissimilar, right? And so I think what's really important when you think about communities is almost look at it through different lenses and what problem and challenge are you solving in that community. It might be similar. It might, population-wise, be very different, but it might have a very similar challenge. And so just a couple examples to show you what I mean. The fact that you have Stephen F. Austin University, we're doing a project in Lubbock right now. So while the size of the community is different, the fact that you have a major university and the community, the benefits of that and the challenges of that, have to be addressed. And so having college town experience is very relevant regardless of the size of the community. We're also doing a comprehensive plan right now in Abilene, Texas. Looking at they're very far from major metro areas, and so while the size of you might be different, you have to look at from an isolation standpoint, there's comparables, and I think Francois did a pretty impressive job of putting together a team for this, specifically for this project. That I think Jason is the best in the business on economics. Jay is the best at writing code. I mean, you have a really talented team that can draw from all those different lessons and all those different communities. That if you just say the name of the community, you might not think it's comparable, but when you look at what's the challenge that was solved there, it's like, oh yeah, that's a challenge we have here. Because I do think it is easy for communities to think that they're the only ones suffering from certain challenges or issues. And when you look across it, there's actually a lot of problems that we solve regularly in so many.
So I don't know whether sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, any thoughts on substandard housing code, things, ideas about that?
Actually, Jason and I worked on a project. I know it's in the city of Hearst, which is in the Metroplex, but they had an issue where a lot of their housing that was built in the 60s and 50s, they ended up having a lot of apartments built in the same area, so that started kind of declining around the same time, and they wanted us to look at a more sustainable approach to neighborhood investment and looking at where should the city support infill, where should they look at code enforcement, and where should they look at zoning amendments. It's really tailoring the recommendations on whether it's regulatory or helping on infrastructure or incentivizing the development and different locations to kind of come up with a plan to implement that, which is a fairly ambitious plan. It was a large bill for them to swallow because the city is fairly large and has a lot of different neighborhoods and different needs. So they have to kind of prioritize it because at the end of the day, they only have so much resources to spend on that. So, and I know Jason has some experience in the city of Plano. Yes, it's a different context, but they have seen similar issues where neighborhoods are declining and there's need for investment. So as Ryan pointed out, we may have worked in different communities, but we see similar, issues, and especially in Texas, you have quite a wide range of, tools that are available to you as a local government to be able to kind of do something creative. So we learned a lot from a lot of work in different communities.
Yeah, I agree. I think Hearst is a great example. I think there's some examples in Terrell that we pulled from. I think, Plano is a good example because we had so much data to work with. We looked at affordability and issues in housing in Weatherford about 2 years ago. We're about to update that and do a little bit more deeper dive into some individual neighborhoods in terms of sustainability and resiliency. The town of Bryan, I was there yesterday. We're working on a lot of catalytic economic projects that are big and maybe more university focused, but they've got a lot of structural issues with their neighborhoods that we're helping them address. So we spend a lot of time looking at neighborhoods and vitality and its structural issues, including, code compliance and lack of maintenance and just, general aging in place that I think are real issues facing Nacogdoches as well.
Thank you. I've got one more. As you can tell, the process and the pathway to getting there and gathering the information is extremely important. We want community participation from all. We want everybody to be involved. I'm a banker, and I'm kind of looking at the bottom line. So tell me what you're going to put in our hands, this council, that we can deliver a good product to our community when you're gone.
Absolutely. I would love to share that with you. So what you will have in your hands is a document that obviously have all information in there that we have worked on. So what we want to do is we want to have an appendix with all the studies and the supporting material. Then we want to provide you with a document that is very clear, reads well, easy to understand, have the different chapters. And then beyond that, we want to have an executive summary that really summarizes the essence of what this is all about. And even beyond that, what we are looking at is sometimes you want to have a 2-page, a description of what is this about, so that you can go down to share with people and hand it down. That's one thing. The other thing we can also do for you throughout the process is having some material available that you can use at presentations. So you can talk about this at an event just during the process, but at the end, what we want you to have is that document that is on the web, but also a hard document and also pamphlets, executive summary, etc.
But beyond that, Francois, I think the important issue is this is going to be a decision-making document that as the city looks at infrastructure investment, whether it's your CRP process or a rezoning case, or somebody's asking for incentives, maybe it's a creative project, somebody's asking for incentives for a project. So it's really about trying to kind of help the city make decisions in the future and say, hey, we said downtown is a priority and here are the things we want to invest in. It's going to take us this long. Here are the kind of projects we want to support in terms of the development on the private side, the public realm, and infrastructure. It's really about aligning the market with the public infrastructure and the private investment. It's really about it's a guide map in the future. It's an investment. It's into the future where in 20 years to look back and see in terms of all the redevelopment that's happened, it's going to pay for itself many times over.
So will it have specific implementable items that you suggest we consider?
Absolutely, very much so.
Give me an example.
We worked for the city of Owensboro, which is in a very rural community in Kentucky. It's in southwest Kentucky. It was on the banks of the Ohio River. Downtown hadn't seen any new building permits in 50 years. They'd not seen any growth in downtown. So they were actually redoing their levee on the Ohio River, and the federal government was spending a lot of money on that levee. It was, I think, in the tune of over $50 million. They had federal funding from McConnell, so they had that money, but they were just doing the park. But then we went in and did a downtown plan and said, hey, you're doing this part, here are all the other things that you can do, and we found a funding source for them that they were willing to undertake and reinvest in their downtown. And they ended up spending, I think, about $100 million of public money, federals and local, and then they've had redevelopment in the tune of $250,000. Actually, more like 250 million. So I don't remember numbers anymore because it's 10 years ago that they started the process. It was a long-term process, but in terms of the return on investment of that planning effort, they ended up redoing a couple of streets. They did a new convention center, and they had like 4 hotels being built in downtown. This is a community that hadn't seen new development in downtown for years. So it suddenly became the mecca of a lot of the downtown, different mayors from different communities were coming and visiting Owensboro all of a sudden, and was featured in the Wall Street Journal. So that became a big success story of, how a plan can actually bring about redevelopment.
And Jay, I think that's a good point. I'm about an hour from Owensboro tonight, but I was just reflecting back on the work that you did in Roanoke that we're in the process of activating. There's more than $400 million in net new private investment that occurred after that downtown planning process. The MAPS 3 process in Oklahoma City was over $750 million. We're working on about $300 million worth of private investment right now, and in Bryan as of yesterday. So there's not a plan that we're not involved in. I think it's just part of this team's ethos. It doesn't always look for value capture and forward-thinking opportunities.
And one thing I'll just add to that with it, in terms of deliverable, Francois spoke about the tangible deliverables of the plan. Jay and Jason spoke about the catalyst type projects, how those can have massive ROI. There's also a lot of intangible deliverables that I'm always kind of champion for. I think I alluded to it before, but the residents truly feel coming out of the process feeling like they're heard, like everybody listens and that they're involved. The ROI on that is invaluable. Staff feeling like it's supported and staff having a very clear direction and path. And, there's an analogy that we show. We have this funny slide that basically shows it's like 50 different people all trying to work on the same thing. They're crashing into each other and they're knocking each other over. And I think of a community very much like that the residents, staff, members, we're all trying to do the best for Nacogdoches. They're all looking really great things. But without that shared vision, we're just kind of crashing into each other. So simply just aligning the vision and then the implementation plan giving you some very clear catalyst projects to start to get there. The ROI on that is off the charts. And I think that's the other.
And perhaps a final thing I would like to share about that is that, for the city of Ennis, for instance, I strongly believe that out of 20 different action items, you may identify one of the top 3 or 5 projects that are catalyst projects. And they are those projects or tasks that will lead to others to fall in place almost automatically, because it means that you've set the stage correct for those tasks. So I'm a strong believer in understanding the entire breadth of what needs to be done, but then identify those catalyst items that you really need to put your thoughts and your actions and your attention to.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Bellinger, the floor is yours.
Well, we've talked a lot about challenges in our community and in other communities, but I'd like to focus a little bit on strengths. And many people in this room, I think, actually chose Nacogdoches to live, including us. 45 years ago, we chose this community, not because of jobs, but because we wanted something this size with the things that Nacogdoches has. So my question is, I appreciate you listening to people. What about digging? How do you dig deeper to help identify strengths that we may not be seeing ourselves? And I know, I'm listening to you, I know you're doing that, but how do you do that?
Well, I think a big part of that is the experience that this team has working in a lot of different communities. There's a saying that says you can't see your label from inside the jar. And I think that's a very appropriate saying that, yes, nobody knows Nacogdoches better than you, right? But there absolutely can be things that you maybe take for granted or things that you think you're communicating to the world that you're not. And so having that fresh perspective, but a perspective that has been working and solving problems in other communities I think that's a huge value. And that's why I think, it's valuable to have firms that don't just work with communities the same size as Nacogdoches, but we've solved a wide range of challenges, because we might see things in a community that you thought that would never work in Nacogdoches, but they might not have just been aware that having this asset or amenity could really set the stage for this future development or attract a certain audience, especially when you're thinking about, you mentioned the quality of life and why you chose to live there. COVID's changed the game. Our firm, we don't have a physical office anymore. Our team is spread across the country now. And the benefit for me as an employer is that means I can hire the best regardless of where they live. And they can go choose a community, not just on the job. So no longer is the job the only means to bring somebody to a community like it was before. And so I think having that, this team has a pretty robust experience in looking at how that's affected other communities and what's ultimately helped people choose where they live.
Let me follow up on that, if I can. You talked a little bit about history, but Nacogdoches, it may be, I don't know, it's unique in the nation because we have multiple histories. So we have the Spanish settlement history, and and I know there are some descendants from the original Spanish settlers, but they may not come out to these. We might not have one of them even on any of these committees. So that might take a little bit more. We also have Native American, First Nations history here. We have mounds that are Native American mounds that are archaeological, finds. The heart of the Texas Revolution was here in Nacogdoches, which people may not know. We have, of course, our Mexican relationships and people from Mexico, many people, and African-American history, and many different African-American histories. And some of these places that we're talking about will have great significance in some of these communities, and it concerns me that we may be thinking, we're going to revitalize and build structures here when really we need to instead be thinking about preservation and historic celebration. So I'm not sure how we get there, because you may only have one or two people talking like that, though I will nag you about it, but, but there may not be, as much discussion.
I would like to add to that. And, the way I approach any project like this, any new community that I work in is, by nature, I'm very inquisitive. And I make sure I visit a city and place, and I learn as much as I can by walking the streets, seeing, looking, and finding things. And I like to read about the history and read about something that's interesting. So much so that I sometimes like to pinpoint it out as something that's not yet been noticed or celebrated. I worked in a community, I did a parks master plan for them, and I learned about the Buffalo Soldiers that were active there with young people and helping them to learn, leadership skills. And I found it so fascinating. I made that a feature in the parks plan, because they used open space, they used trails. Well, why not talking about them? Why not celebrate them? So I see a plan like this and the plans that we are doing as a way to identify those things that perhaps have almost been forgotten or have not been celebrated as much as I can. But let us help you, not even talk about it, but help identify some of those things that you perhaps are very used to. You've seen it all the time, like Brian referred to. But we can help you also identify new things and celebrate that as part of the plan, and make sure. I'm very a strong supporter of the preservation of history, and I always look for ways how can you celebrate history within your community. So I believe our team has that ethos as we approach any new community.
Yeah, and we have. If you're particularly interested in that topic, I would encourage you to go listen to. We have our firm Civic Grant has a podcast, and one of the episodes is on revitalization without gentrification, and it talks about how do you revitalize an area and without just whitewashing it and just making it a new shopping center. And a lot of that comes down to conversations and stories and understanding the culture and what makes it great. And then making sure that as you do make improvements, there's things that need to find their way into the zoning to make sure that you're not then excluding somebody. And so the example that's in that podcast is, if you have a dilapidated house, that is providing rent, low rent homes, right? And you might have this big, huge, dilapidated old house that probably needs to be torn down, but it is providing rent for somebody in the community. And if you just go to revitalize that, think about, well, what is the importance of this person and this culture that is living there? And we just, write a plan and approach development in a way to tear that down and build something brand new. You erase and you remove that person from that area and that culture. And so there's a lot of different strategies and solutions to where, within that one house, well, that house could be redone by a small scale development. If your zoning allowed that to be a duplex or a quadplex, that can then provide that low income rent for multiple people on that scene, and that person can now be in a nicer house that's a duplex and they can afford it. And that's just obviously one example. That's something that we're really passionate about, and for us, our role comes to engagement, making sure that we talk to those individuals and we understand what matters to them and what's important. And you'll find a lot of times that people in their own community aren't even aware of their community's own history. And so kind of bringing some of that to the forefront, like Francois mentioned, and putting it in the park feature and making sure that it's celebrated. You also have new students coming in SFA every year, that they are part of the culture, but they're not part of the history. And so how can you teach them about what Nacogdoches is? Your built environment is a great way to do that.
I would like to add to that by mentioning that, you and your city already have your tremendous citizens group that are passionate about history. You've got your societies, you've got your landmark commission, you've got your historical groups that really focuses and do their utmost to protect. Now, I wanted to mention two things. One is that whenever you find a structure that is dilapidated, is just not in a state that you want to be able to use it well, but it has the character. Let's look for a way to repurpose it, but repurpose it with respect. Never damage or affect the essence of what that structure is about. And that takes an artist, it takes a person with a good eye. What aspect can you redo, but what aspect do you need to preserve? The other thing I want to mention is that often the mistake is made that historic districts are identified. Well, that's one thing, to have all the buildings or summer buildings being historic value. I am a strong supporter of it's the context of your historic area that's also important. In other words, you want to make sure that the buildings, the size, the feel, the street grid, all those things, the sidewalks, even though it's not the historic building per se, but the context support that entire area for its value as a place, beyond just being historic. It's an added benefit to be historic, but it also has other qualities that we have to celebrate and not forget. Because if you don't do that, eventually you have these little islands of historic places, and it is no meaning. There's no connection. You don't want to do that.
One more. I actually have four more, but I'm only going to ask one. I do think we will have to help bring people together who can do more work in some of the communities. How amenable are you to working with groups of students? Or I'm connected with the School of Social Work, and we do quite a bit of interviewing and all that. If there were groups that we could identify that could go deeper into communities, would you be willing or lead or train them to do what you wanted them to do? Or could that help with some of this cost and also some of the work that really needs to be done in much more depth? And let me just add, many people do not have cell phones here, just flat out don't have them. And if they do, they may not be able to work them to do a survey. They may just be able to answer the phone. And broadband we do not have broadband throughout this city. And definitely when you get out into the county, we don't have it. So we've got some challenges. So working with other people too.
Absolutely, Ryan. I would love for you to maybe respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, 1,000%, we want to leverage what community leaders, organizations, volunteers that we can to go deeper and have those meaningful conversations. So to that question, some of those things can definitely expand our reach beyond what we can do. Obviously, there still is a fee associated with the meeting in the box, for example. Our team puts that together. We need to train an individual that's going to go run those meetings, but then they can go do that 100 times, and that's no cost if that's a volunteer. And so that's really valuable. It's community outreach stuff. So people that are already serving, interacting with these people on a daily basis. There's a lot of different ways that we can kind of arm and leverage them, from as simple as simply being a brand champion or a project champion and making sure that they're just telling people about the project. That's just one way. But then a more formal way, like I think you were alluding to, of actually having them kind of engage that community into proper engagement and facilitating of listening and collecting information. So there still always is, it's not like, yes, we can do that, and there's because it's all just volunteers. Obviously, somebody needs to coordinate that. Somebody needs to do the input of that, make sure we're analyzing it. But it can definitely expand the reach far beyond what our team could do in person. So yeah.
I mean, you have students groups, you have civic groups, you have various volunteer groups that we definitely can mobilize to help, as I said earlier, be the hands and feet of the city, so to speak.
I did want to allow for public comment. My thoughts were that we would have the council ask questions initially, and hopefully a lot of those questions were some of the ones that you have in your mind. But if there's someone who would like to speak, make a comment, we'd like you to come to the microphone and state your name. Please make those make comments to the council, and then we'll work with the consultant.
Okay, council. Okay, the question I had was related to the community engagement, which we talked a lot about, and there's so many ways of getting as many people as possible to respond. But I want to say that the reason you don't often get a lot of responses from certain communities is not because they can't get to the meeting or it's the wrong time or they just don't come to meetings, because they know from their lived experience that it doesn't matter and people don't care. So that has to be addressed a lot. You get them to fill out a survey piece of paper, but they know that you don't really care. And that's not just something you can't just say, oh yes, you do care, because you have to do some kind of way of producing skin in the game and letting people know that this is different. So I just want to put that out there because it's not just a matter of the numbers. The other thing I wanted to say was the plan we have now is full of great action ideas. People brought up and gave it to us and went home, and they never got there. I mean, city managers moved on, elections happened, mayors and city councils came and went, and that plan just sat there. So I'm hoping that there's something that we can put in place structurally that they can do. I know they can't make us do it. I think there's ways that they can embed things that will kind of not let it get forgotten through the years. Those are my comments.
Right.
Yeah, thank you so much. If I can just respond to that first part, I guess my response would just be amen. Yes, 1,000% agree with what you said, that engagement, I'm one of the founders of Civic Brand, and the reason that we started this company is because we thought that public engagement was broken. That when people did do public engagement, they were simply checking a box to say, yes, we did this, we heard from this group. And it has to be meaningful. And so, the good news for us is we typically get hired by communities and cities that are serious about not just checking off a box and doing engagement, but doing engagement the right way, which means making it accessible, listening, and taking what you've heard and actually implementing it, because you're absolutely right. It's not just because they're at work or they're home with kids. My voice has never been heard. Why would this be heard? But having those brand champions and those leaders, we keep them on board. kind of bring their group along. So I definitely appreciate that comment because I think it's absolutely true and essential.
And something I would like to add to that in terms of how can you also show people that you care. You do that by having some results from this plan. And we talk often about low-hanging fruit. What are those things that you can do? Sometimes it's the smallest thing that brings huge benefit to either individual or a community. And if you identify those small things that seemingly so unimportant, well, for that group, it's so important. Is there a way that we can actually identify those items that and regard them then as those low-hanging fruit, where you can gain support, gain goodwill, gain their interest in what you do, and know that you care. Because now you've demonstrated, we've done this plan, we had this effort, but hey, things are happening. We have a new park, we have a new a place around our community, we have a new pavilion, we have a new something. And what we want to do is make sure that the recommendations of the parks plan be built into our plan. So that's not forgotten. We want to revitalize that plan for the items that are in there to make sure that, yes, we all know about it, and maybe that can become part of a plan to be implemented. And then finally, I think it's also to make sure that you have an accountable environment where you as a leadership has put in the effort to do this plan. Well, to be accountable means that you make sure that the vision is held in place, people follow that vision, and then things are done to make it towards that vision. I always explain it like this. A vision is like a compass. My compass says, I want to go there. I want to go north. That's what my compass tells me. How I get there is not a straight path. It will go this a little bit this way, a little bit to the east, a little bit to the west, but eventually I will be north. That's where my vision took me. How I get there is my roadmap. And the roadmap is what this plan is about. We want to have a vision set for the community that everyone buys into and will last for a long time because people have buy-in, they support it, it was their vision. That if you do that, if you have that compass, then you can do almost, then you can really make choices along the way that goes towards that direction and just don't push you in the wrong direction altogether. So that's what's important: accountability and a strong vision like a compass.
And Francois, the other thing would be the ownership that we're building through this process, through the community and the committee that's being appointed. It's they're going to be the keepers of the flame, making sure that the accountability, to the elected officials because we'll do the plan and we are going to move forward. The consultants are not going to be here, so it's going to be, on the community to kind of make sure that the plan is actually, held to, and the keepers of the flame are asking the question of City Council when there's a budget being adopted or when there's a new zoning change for development, that they're checking to see, okay, how does this match up with the comp plan?
Absolutely.
Jason Monday Sign Service. I wanted to ask a question to the council again about the slide that showed the cost of their service. If we put that number back up.
Sure, I can do so.
Is that service for a 1 year, or is it 2 years, or 5 years, 1,875 days? What is this service? What are we getting for our value of our dollar? Our brand. I'm in the sign business, and I help other communities other than Nacogdoches brand their cities with the things that are being branded here: garbage trucks, buses, and so on and so forth. But what we want to know is, for the 425,000, is that the correct number?
Maybe share that with you.
Is that for 1 year?
It's for the duration of the project, which is it 16 months?
16 months.
It's over a year, but it's less than 2 years.
Okay, yeah, because I did the math at 1 year, and it looks like that's about $1,360 a day, about $6,800 a week, not counting Sundays, that's counting Saturdays. And that's at 425,000 a year. And that comes out at 35,000 population, somewhere around $12 a person. So what I wanted to know is what our value at $12 a person. We already have Nedco and things of that nature here that has such a hard time. In fact, zero bringing in outside businesses in here that we spend thousands on. So I just want to make sure what you've done at Ennis, or if our people talk to Marty Nelson, that's the city manager of Ennis, and the city manager of Terrell is Mike Sims. And I work with those communities a lot also. What our deal is where we're going to fall in under your survey, where those communities have over 120,000 vehicles a day pass in front of both of those cities. And they have the advertising rights to reach 120,000 a day, where we only have 42,000 at max capacity on Highway 59 that passes our. So what value for 425,000? I seen there it says so many hours you're going to commit to this and so many hours you're going to commit to that. Are those hours that are people going to be in our community working, or is that just somebody going to be on the internet updating the website? And then what she said was it falls back on the community. That was great what she said, to keep us engaged. What community are we going to fall back on? Mothers and dads who work multiple hours a day? What are we getting for our 400 and, what does that say, 427,000? That was $2,000.
Need to be addressed.
My glasses don't work anymore. So
Anyway,
I'm $2,000 off. So what are we getting?
We appreciate your comments, and we're certainly, consider that. It's a lot of money. Thank you for your comments. Yes, sir.
I would like to respond to that by saying that, the biggest concern that I have seen in communities is when they do not plan. Percentage-wise, if you put in a certain amount in your planning, any dollar that you spend after that in construction, engineering, design work, any of that, if your planning work wasn't done well, then the dollars that you spend on your infrastructure and all your design and implementation and construction work really is almost not a waste, but it's not the optimum. It requires good planning to get a better result in the bigger term. In other words, we talk about 427,000 compared to millions that are spent on whether it's a textile that will come through there with their road. Well, our plan can direct them to what we want them to do for the benefit of the community. Our plan will direct if you do want to have new housing development somewhere. Well, if you do good planning, it will be done based on good principles, and the end result will be an economic return for the community. So the investment of planning versus construction and implementation, it's a wash. You cannot compare. It is so beneficial to do your work well.
Thank you. Mr. Engler?
My name is Chris Engler, and I would like to speak primarily to our city commission and secondarily to you. When I was listening to, tell me the name, please. Roy Bowden. When Mr. Bolton was speaking, I would like to respond to, give you some thoughts. When you asked about your area, I'm assuming you're talking about the southeast border. And you said that there were two Nacogdoches, or two different cultures. When you said that, I began to think, what does the southeast border have to offer to Nacogdoches in terms of building it up? And I got to thinking about some of the businesses that have come out of that area. You remember Aubrey's Cafe? A great business. Now this one wasn't in that area, but they were blacks that started it. The Upshaws that started a restaurant over in Douglas. And I think about the Pinedas and their painting company. These were people that had vision, and these were people that were self-starters. If we're going to get the southeast border and these areas a part of building up Nacogdoches, then what we need are more of these Aubreys and more of these Upshaws. These are the people that we need. And we cannot throw money at these areas and expect that to improve. What we need, I believe, are good mentors to get more people like Aubrey, the Upshaws, that these people will also impart to other people in that area and have vision. Nacogdoches is not just buildings, it's not just streets, it's not just parks, but it's people. And these people and our people, we need to have vision. And I think that if we're going to talk about building this city up, that we need to include mentoring and not just throwing money at it. So my thought.
Thank you, sir. I think we all agree with that. That's extremely important. Anybody else? Yes. Be passionate.
I'm Joanne England. And I have, for many, many years, I've lived here since 1967. And been chosen Nacogdoches because of its location and its beauty. And then, but anyway, when I drive around and I see overgrown lawns and curbs that you cannot even see the concrete, that like the ad says, that makes me want to cry. And that wouldn't take a lot of the thousands of dollars of money. It would take volunteers if necessary, or with more city help that could take each area, and our town is beautiful, and just move out from town and look at these places that need it. South Street, Fredonia School, that lot there, I was instrumental several years ago to get that cut because it looked terrible. So we just got too much trash on the roads. And I would be a volunteer, we pick up the trash and the bottles and everything else on our county road. So our city, to me, if citizens could see a cleaning up, that would be give impetus to this plan or whatever plan we might do. We need something immediate so that the citizens can see that we're concerned about our county.
I can make a quick comment on that. Senator, thank you for saying this. One of the things that we have, and we're going through a lot of things right now. This process, the budget process, obviously COVID, there's a lot going on. Cities are all process, a lot of unknowns. But one of the things that we have slated for council to review as part of the budget is we're adding more people to code enforcement. And again, we have literally 1.5 people that does code enforcement for 25 plus square mile community. That's GPU. So one of the things that we're doing with that is we're adding back into the process of not hiring for advertising, or because the council gave us the authorization to proceed with the budget's not adopted, to hire one additional full-time person, 2 part-time people, code enforcement. We met last week with a large team of employees, parks, public works, fire department, that's where code enforcement is right now. I've got planning as well. And we're looking at completely reformulating a lot of our city organization, honestly, to really meet the needs of our community. We've been very solid. And I mean solid. We work together, but we work in different departments. So we're trying to consolidate those things. Quite honestly, not to save money, not to spend money. Believe it or not, it's not about saving money, but it's the level of service. And so I hope, I'm not going to say that you're going to see a need tomorrow, but you will see the fact that we do have positions posted right now. So if you want to volunteer, we're actually going to have a volunteer. So we're going to volunteer for all this effort because we cannot be at every corner in experience, it's going to take people to do that for us and at least identify so that we can be together. We're going to have conversations with council because we're going to start making people mad. Because of the city and making, picking up junk cars, litter, weeding lots, et cetera. So it's going to be, my expectation is going to be a major focus of my office for the next 12 to 16 months as we deal. Okay.
That was a good one. Anybody else?
Question. If we volunteer, and what do we do with all the trash? When we have, I'm not gonna give this microphone. They'll pick it up. What we gonna do with all our garbage bags?
Part of that is volunteering. I mean, I can visit with you for a couple of for a long time. But really the volunteering is more than anything is A, train on the local. Dealing with code enforcement, but honestly, it's pitting one neighbor against the other.
Right, yes.
It's a very delicate matter. So part of that is identifying what these issues are. Literally, I know that there's issues with cell phones, one of the things that we have, and I'll tell you right now, if you want to deal with code enforcement right now, you can do it all day long. We have an app, it's called 311. You have to register to download it from the App Store, whichever phone you use. But you can literally take a picture, it will take the GPS coordinates, it will send the notice to staff, they'll get routed, and then we go. So that's part of the volunteering portion, what we asking. All we need to do is identify it, we'll handle it, and if there's trash, we can work with various civic organizations. SFA is always looking for ways to incorporate their parents, worry other organizations get service hours. They would love, honestly, we've spoken to a lot of the administration at SFA, they're looking for ways to engage the students, and this is a way. Because we need is able-bodied people to come in and help those that can.
Okay. Wonderful, thank you.
Okay.
While he's still up there, I want to ask a question. I know that we had a situation with the storm, ice and snow, but do we have more than one of those big trucks that pick up limbs?
Well, we have two private trucks that picks up limbs. We used to have one, we added a second one a few years ago, and took away people from the streets department to add in capacity. So the city spent about $300,000 after the storm pickup. What you're seeing today is trees and land, or trees really that were hoping to survive the storm that didn't, and now they're cutting them down. And you're seeing that, and so you're seeing kind of round 2 to round 3 of what people were hoping to make out. I will tell you, we have a lot of trees in these sections. Everybody knows that it's a big task, and by the time we get to you, it's probably 3 weeks by the time we make rounds. And honestly, we also have situations where folks have contact with contractors. They take down several trees, and instead of paying them under, they don't know to leave that work. And so we're stuck picking it up. Because you as your neighbors see that, call in, and we can only pick up so many piles at any given house because we've got our services remainder of the community. So one house can take an entire truck with it. And so it's a challenge. I mean, we may, as part of the budget next year, or even going forward to council, we may have a second or a third brush truck with it. But it's expensive, you got housing. So, but it is a priority. It's just by the time you get to it, it just takes a long time.
Thank you. Thank you all for being with us tonight. Council, any other questions for the consultant? Yes, sir.
Oh, no.
Okay. Any other comments?
And in regards to Mr. Chris, in funding, I don't call in any way that I made a statement about money. Mario and I talked several months ago about revitalizing the neighborhood, but on a private basis, because a lot of those homes is not owned by people that actually live in them. People that live out of town. So we're finding a way to have people become pride in their neighborhood, not trying to raise funds. Let those people take the pride. Let them rebuild. I never in any way stated that I was requesting money from the city, the county, or the state. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Mayor, the only thing that we have, and if I can ask Elena real quick, just take literally 3 to 5 minutes of time. The last piece is the committees. Okay. And so if Elena, if you don't mind, I'll go to the microphone. If you don't mind putting that presentation, I'd like for Francois to be there so that I just want him to hear what we've got going on the committees. And I'll be really quick. It just advanced all the way to where it gives the advance, go back one, right there. So just for the group and for the council, what we're looking at doing is, again, if we move with this process, with these projects, is to create 2 committees. One is a comprehensive land use plan committee that's comprised of 50 people. The other one is that downtown management project. As you can see, and again, I know a lot of acronyms, NISD, Nacogdoches Independent School District, NEPCO, Nacogdoches Economic Development Corporation, NHLPC, Nacogdoches Historic Landmark Preservation Committee, CDD Committee. So what we're looking at doing, again, for the direction of council, is creating a committee to work in tandem with staff, along with consultants, and ultimately really make a connection point into the community. Next. So what we asked council and the community was to go through a process and apply to be on this committee. So on the comprehensive land use plan, ultimately, on both of these plans, ultimately it's council appointments. And so these are the names that were suggested by city council, along with city staff. We are looking at, we would like to have a council, at least 1 council representative, maybe 2, but certainly 1 to 2 council representatives for the comp plan. But as you can see, here are the names that are being suggested by a respective council member, by their respective area, as far as whether they represent SFA and ISD, the Planning and Zoning Commission, NEPCO. So those are the names that are being suggested at this time. If you'll advance the slide, Elena. The second one is, again, mentioning that we would like to get representation from council, 1 to 2 members. And then these are the names that were suggested from council members for the downtown master plan. Again, keep in mind that no one's been appointed at this point. These are just names that have been suggested by council for these efforts. If you can advance the slide one more time. Again, from a committee perspective, the responsibility guiding principle, I'm not going to read this to you, but again, at the end of the day, these folks are representing the community, right? That's kind of that tie between staff, council, you, the consultant. So it's about representing the community in the planning process, providing that guidance, staying connected, serving as hosts. A lot of times they know the words that we just can't, certainly consultants can't because they're not from here. But we need them to kind of help facilitate those conversations. Recruiting, part of it, because, like it was mentioned before, how do you get into those hard to reach areas? They can help with that. They're not the only ones, but they're part of that process. By communicating and working to make sure that we're representing a diverse environment. There's going to be some guiding principles. They've got to make sure that they attend the meetings, that they engage, that they participate in the planning process. Again, just simple quorum, maintaining quorum, decision making is through consensus. They're not a policy making board, they're an advisory capacity. And all meetings are open to the public. So we're not going to do this in hiding. It'll be posted, it'll be in public, and so people can attend. Next slide. And then really what we're looking for is, for those folks that have not filed, we'd like to get their application on file. We'll make sure that gets completed. We would like to present this group, or this presentation of these names to council at one of your meetings of September, hopefully along with the recommendation on the consultant. That definitely need to notify those people that weren't selected, because not everybody can be on the committee, but they can also participate as part of a task force, part of a focus group, all those components. They can be the interviewed individual. And then bring the committees together to meet, and let's go. That's really ultimately what we want to get going and start this process in earnest, like the consultant was saying, in October timeframe, to kind of at least get them oriented and get them started on the process so that we can get the process going. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Great. Anything else from consultants?
Francois,
of course.
what I would like to share about the steering committees, what is very important is that when you identify people to serve, you really need people that are committed, that will, have their time available to attend meetings, to be part of the process, and to be committed to be, if possible, for the majority of meetings to be there. That's important. But an even more important aspect of the steering committees, in my mind, is that you also want them to identify the champions. If not the steering committee as a whole, identify those individuals that are the champions, that really will root for the plan, that will not only in the community, but even be the connection to council. Even on council, you need a champion. So that's what we always look for in terms of the citizens committees, that you want their commitment, but also their champions to be part of the process.
Thank you, sir. Okay, now we're adjourned. Thank you. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Principal. Thanks, Principal.